stay tuned because for the next 60 minutes, Motorsports Unlimited is on the air. Hi, I'm Jerry Bryant, and these are the lovely ladies of motorsports. And all this hour, we're going to have 60 minutes of action-packed excitement. All kinds of exciting things will happen. And we got the famous Bill Wildt, and we got all kinds of other good stuff that's happening all this hour. Motorsports Unlimited, 60 minutes of non-stop action. So let's go to the studio right now, huh?
Thanks, Jerry, and hi, everybody. Welcome to the studio headquarters of Chicagoland's most watched, most talked about Access television series. I'm Samantha Bentley, and this is the 933rd edition of Motorsports Unlimited. Today, we continue with part 2 of Bill's motorcycle adventure we began last week, titled Motorcycling Rediscovered. If you'll recall, last week we explained in the summer of 2004, Bill found a motorcycle that rekindled his interest in riding motorcycles, dormant for some 15 years. We explained how he found it and how he set it up to take a trip he'd been thinking about for almost 50 years. On the morning of August 1st, 2004, about 2 months after he acquired the bike, he departed. His first stop was the Indiana border. Then it was on to the South Bend Speedway for a quick nostalgic stop. Then it was a moment of reflection at the Ohio border. Let's pick up the storyline of this adventure as he completes the first day of his journey in Toledo, Ohio.
It's getting dark now. I'm in Toledo, Ohio. It was my plan to go beyond Toledo, Ohio. It's about halfway between Toledo and Cleveland. I'm a little short of the 300 miles that I wanted to put. I'm at about 280 miles. I decided to make the change in the plan just because I've noticed something on Route 20 that surprised me. I've been watching for at least the last 2 hours and haven't seen a single motel or hotel or place to stay. Got a little concerned about that because looking on the map, the other side of Toledo looks pretty much the same, Route 20 all the way. So I didn't want to take a chance. Toledo, I noticed the airport sign. There's always places to stay around an airport, that's for sure. So I decided to stop in here. This, by the way, is a Red Roof Inn, and obviously I'm doing it. I do it on a budget, and I was glad to find this place. A couple of things real quick before I forget them. I must tell you that one of the reasons that you can travel alone on a motorcycle is because when you're a biker, you're never alone. Every time I've stopped to tape these pieces alongside the road and all that, at least 2 or 3 bikers have slowed down and yelled at me, "You need help? Are you okay?" and all that. It's like when you're a biker, you have friends everywhere, and I'd almost forgotten that. It's a real fraternity. It's wonderful. Everything, by the way, everything has worked perfectly. If you want to know, by the way, how much stuff you should take with you when you go on a trip like this, the answer is, or how much space you need, all the space that you can possibly get, and it still really isn't enough room. So everything was, some of my friends said to me, "Well, Bill, what do you really need a tank bag?" Yeah, I do, because this is where I've got all the video equipment, where I keep all the video equipment and all that to do this work, and the still camera equipment is back here. So yeah, I need, I could actually use more space. Let's see, what else did I want to tell you that I'm trying to remember these things as I go along, because I really don't want to stop every few minutes and show you something cool, but literally every 10 minutes there's something really cool to look at, and I am thoroughly enjoying this. By the way, it's 9 o'clock here right now, but that's still 8 o'clock Chicago time. It sort of surprised me how dark it was getting, but again, I'm driving away from the sun, if that's the right way to say it. Anyhow, so I'm here for the night, and we'll continue on. This is day 1, completed 280 miles, so that's pretty close to the window that I wanted, 300 miles a day. I think I'm doing fine, and I tell you, I'm having a great time.
We're glad you're having a great time, Bill, but we still don't know quite what you're up to. Hi, I'm Patty Borwitz, wondering, along with you, where Bill is headed. While he gets some rest, let's turn the clock back 40 years and pick up on his writings about his first motorcycle trip when he and his high school buddy Todd were 21 years old and decided to ride to Kansas City. If you'll recall from last week, they were plagued by mechanical and preparation problems, which prevented them from making more than 150 miles on the first day. When we left them, They were camping on the side of the road. Perhaps their second day will be more trouble-free. After all, how many times can you tighten bolts and repack your sleeping bag? Janine?
If you'll recall, when we left Bill and Todd, they were camped for the night along Route 66, about 150 miles southwest of Chicago. We pick up the story as they awaken for day 2 of their motorcycle trip some 40 years ago. Bill writes, "I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I heard was the roar of a semi-truck blasting by. Then another, and another, which finally forced me to open my eyes to the bright early morning sun. In a moment I became conscious of the fact that my back was soaking wet. The heavy dew had soaked through the sleeping bag. I quickly got up swearing, which woke Todd. He asked what was wrong. When I told him, he showed me the piece of plastic he'd laid down before unrolling his sleeping bag. Big deal. So you sleep outside your parents' cabin in Wisconsin a few times. Right away, you're a camping expert," I growled, while at the same time realizing that I was cold where I was wet. "Now, what about the snake business, Mr. Camping Expert? Do they or don't they come out at night?" He thought for a moment, remembering our conversation of the night before, and said with carefully chosen words, "No, they definitely don't come out at night. I was only kidding last night." Very funny. Now I wasn't convinced anymore, and resolved to myself that I would find out from someone else. We hadn't slept very long. The sun really comes out early in the country and can't be pushed back by pulling down a shade. I'm basically a night person, and this was miserable for me. As we were gathering up our junk, we noticed a lot of oil on both of our bikes, much more than the usual amount on British bikes. We hadn't been through any freshly oiled areas that we were aware of, but then we had ridden many hours at night, British bike lighting being what it was and all. Still, we carefully started checking them over. Sure enough, we had a serious problem. Both of our oil tanks had developed a split in their seams. We were alarmed at how much oil was gone. Had we run the engines without oil? If so, how long? Frantic checking with a nearby twig revealed the tanks had about an inch of oil in them, and judging by the oil gathered just beneath the tanks on top of the transmissions, we determined we had not ridden without oil because a good portion of it had dripped out while the bikes were standing still. "Well, now what, Bill?" Todd growled. Embodied in the statement was the suggestion that I'd talked him into still another adventure that was getting us into deep trouble. It was generally true that I talked him into things, including this trip, but you needed somebody to do stuff with, and Todd was generally a willing accomplice. To his credit, he never complained about some of the predicaments I got us into, but he did have a way, with a few well-chosen words, of making it my responsibility to extract us from them. "I think we've got enough oil to get us to a gas station. If we get lucky, we'll find one with a welder. If not, we'll just keep adding oil until we find one. God knows we stopped often enough to fix stuff. Adding oil should be no bother." "Okay, but let's go easy," Todd suggested. "Yeah. Boy, I don't know about you, but I'm sore all over. My neck and forearms from riding, my back from sleeping on the lumpy ground." Now mounting our machines, I added, "Oh, my butt too. I guess we're not used to this much riding." He wasn't listening now. I could see he was distracted and furious in his own understated way. I started to tell him how to ride down the grassy hill. Straight down, first gear, no throttle. Just a little bit of rear brake if necessary, but don't touch the front brake. No response. "What's wrong?" I asked. "My left mirror is bent," he blurted. "Must have happened during the fall last night." "Well, let's go," I said. "We'll fix it when I weld the oil tanks." "I'd rather fix it now." He started to get off the bike. "Todd, really, I'm not trying to rush you, and I know you like the bike to be perfect, but it would make more sense to wait until we had a welding torch in case it has to be heated or something." He was starting to get that stubborn, I want it right look in his eye. I thought as quickly as I could, "Come on, we'll find a place to have breakfast first. You know, eggs and bacon and stuff." I dangled the carrot, hoping it would be more enticing than having his bike exactly right. I knew he liked to eat, though you sure couldn't tell it from his slender 6-foot, 140-pound frame. Fresh juice, toast, and maybe some sausage, I went on, trying to beat back the stubbornness. Okay, he finally said, but I know what you're doing, and we are going to make my bike right. Yeah, sure, man, but first let's get something to eat and find some welding torches. We fired up the bikes and motored down the hill uneventfully. A few miles down the road, we found a small truck stop. A faded, weathered sign ordered trucks to park in the back, cars in front. I wondered where motorcycles should park. Didn't make any difference. There were only a few other vehicles here anyway. There were gas pumps off to the side of the place, and I told Todd we could probably get oil there. Don't forget about my mirror. Yeah, I know. Hey, we're doing pretty good today. We've traveled a few miles and nothing has broken or fallen off the bikes yet. I elbowed him playfully as we walked into the restaurant. He glared at me, and I could see he hadn't gotten over the mirror yet. The restaurant was a pleasant enough little place, gingham curtains and tablecloths, real homey. The waitress brought us the menus and disappeared. Todd was still grumbling about his mirror. I just had to wait until he got over it. When the waitress returned, she asked us the simple question, juice? Naturally, Todd had to ask what kind they had. I swear, sometimes he'd do stuff like that just to aggravate me. I mean, come on, a grown man doesn't know what kind of juice he wants with his breakfast? So the waitress rattled off the selection like she had probably done 1,000 times before. I indulged myself with my ice water. Orange. Is the orange juice fresh squeezed? He interjected. No, it comes in a bottle. And she droned on. Tomato, grapefruit, pineapple, and grape. He thought deeply, like he was deciding on U.S. foreign policy. Then, like a bolt of lightning had struck him with the meaning of life, he declared, prune. I spit out the ice water and nearly went over backwards on my chair. Prune, I exclaimed. That's not one of your choices. You're 21 years old. You don't special order prune juice. The veins were bulging out of my neck and people were looking. Prune. What, he said. I like prune. I looked at his eyes and for a moment I couldn't tell if he was serious or pulling my string. Bring us both orange juice, miss, I directed. And don't ask him any more stuff. I'll order for us. What? Said Todd. Todd, every time you order first, you screw it up. After you listen to my order and it sounds good to you, you ask the waitress to change your order to what I'm having. So from now on, I'm ordering first. You can't be trusted. What? He said. I think I saw a glimmer in his eye. He must be pulling my string. But then, that's only fair because that's what I was doing to him. After breakfast, we left the restaurant laughing. With a couple of extra quarts of oil each, we headed southwest again in our quest for Kansas City. Springfield, Illinois was only 40 to 50 miles. The gas station attendant figured we would find a welding shop there. Our operating procedure was firmly established by now. We'd stop every 15 to 20 minutes, tighten up everything, whether we were having problems or not. This also gave us a chance to get back feeling in our hands and feet. The oil leaks were bad enough to use maybe a half quart every second stop. It looked like we would have enough to get to Springfield. About 10 miles outside of Springfield, I noticed something unusual about Todd's bike. While we had stopped doing the continuous critiquing because we were making regular maintenance stops, I just happened to notice more oil leaking than previously. I throttled back and made a pass behind him, scrutinizing his mount as I did so. It appeared that a steady stream of oil was blowing off the rear fender. I double-checked again, and as I passed behind him, I could smell gas. I thought about waiting another 10 minutes till our next stop, but if it was gas, we'd better not take any chances. I motioned him over. Now what, Bill? Todd demanded, removing his helmet. I don't know. Something's leaking real bad on your machine, and it smells like gas. Maybe the float stuck on one of my amyls, he suggested, looking toward the carbs. There was definitely gas dripping, but not from the carbs. We located the seam on the bottom of the gas tank that had cracked from the continuous vibration. When we were rolling along at 70 miles an hour, the dripping gas would blow back, soaking the oil tank and diluting the leaking oil, carrying the mess into the rear fender and discharging behind the bike. This was a rather serious development. Most welding shops won't weld gas tanks. I told Todd that and offered that maybe we had better find someplace to rent welding tanks, and I'd weld the stuff. I was familiar with doing gas tanks from my stock car days. I didn't like it, but I'd do it. Todd seemed to be more concerned about how poor his gas mileage would be until it was fixed. If I were you, I'd be more worried about going up like a torch, I offered. The comment seemed to sober him. Do you think that could happen, he queried. You know more about bikes than I do. Could it happen? He pressed the question. I don't think it has anything to do with knowing about bikes. Gasoline is highly flammable, and there is a hot engine and hot exhaust pipes. You remember your high school physics and chemistry. We were in the same classes. You know, flashpoint and all of that. His face grew grimmer as I talked. Well, I'm not writing it, he proclaimed. Huh? I'm not writing that thing with the risk of cremation hanging over my head. He was adamant. I had gone too far. Todd, I'm just pulling your string a little. I'm not writing it. Well, what do you suggest we do? This is not where I plan to spend my vacation, I said, looking around at the seemingly endless fields of corn in all directions. We walked over to a couple of fair-sized boulders a ways off from the road and sat down to ponder our fate. You could ride ahead into Springfield and get a tow truck to come back for me, Todd offered. Yeah, and I could get 5 miles down the road and break down. It's not a good idea to go touring with English bikes by yourself. Well,
that's a heck of a place to stop, Janine. I guess that's what those in literary circles call a pregnant pause. While we think about what Bill and Todd might have done that day, some 40 years ago, let's get back to the present as Bill awakens and prepares for the day's ride before leaving the motel room.
Well, folks, we begin day 2 now. I'm just packing up, spent the night in a motel, and putting the stuff back together again, and getting ready to load up the bike. A couple of things I want to mention. First of all, and I'm sure that this is similar to all of these companies that produce these touring luggage for motorcycles, or bags, if you want to call it that. Boy, you talk about well thought out. It's really, really something. This entire unit, the tail pack, hooks together with the, even though these are different manufacturers, this is Nelson Rig, and this is Covermaster, I believe. I'll check it. Covermaster, I believe. Anyway, they actually fit together very, very well. And I'm going to check on to see if that Nelson Rig, the one that goes from all the way from side to side, could actually be made to work with these, even though it's not designed to work with it, because it would really be nice to have even more room. But in any event, this works all very well, and the whole thing goes together. You just walk out of the room after you put it all together. You just walk out of the room and hang it on the bike, hook the security straps on, and you're gone. Everything is so well thought out. You know, the handles that you have on these bags, even this is a tank bag. Now, and by the way, this map thing, this is great. I just keep putting the maps underneath there, and when I stop to stretch my legs or what have you, check the map, check where I am and all that. This is real handy, so you don't have to pull maps out as long as you keep your route there. In addition to that, here again, thinking ahead. Here's a handle. So that you can just grab it off the bike and carry it in. And again, it just hooks on with the 4 cam locks. Very, very well thought out. Pretty cool. It's 8:30 now. Let me see. 8:41. Boy, time gets away from me. It's all, folks, believe me, it's all this videotape stuff that takes the time. I am torn between 2 things. I'd really like to get you enthusiastic about touring on motorcycles, or for that matter, you can tour in cars, I guess. But you make sure it's convertible. You put the top down like the MG Club does when they come to the Rock downtown Chicago every winter. Make sure you put the tops down and put a coat and hat on. It like allows you to get into the environment more, in my opinion. And a motorcycle is just ideal for it. I'm torn between that, producing a program that will be wonderful and inspirational, and ruining my own trip, because every time I stop to do one of these video pieces, it's minimum half an hour blown to up to an hour blown that I could be riding along enjoying. So I'm giving you as much as I can stand until I want to keep enjoying my trip, because this is my trip, remember? In any event, very well thought out. I can see this stuff was put together by people. Oh, the double zippers I always thought were sort of a pain. It zips around one way and one comes from the other side and all that. Boy, do I see the wisdom of that now. When you're trying to pack things absolutely full of stuff, you pull the zipper closed a little on one side and then squeeze the other side down and pull the zipper more and more and more. It really does help. Once again, these things were designed by people that understand touring, apparently, and I'm the beneficiary of it. So it's time to load up. I'm in Toledo, Ohio, and I mentioned that I stopped a little bit early. We're about 280 miles from Chicago right now, and I stopped a little bit early because of my concern that I didn't see any places to stay. Maybe I'm going to have to make sure as I go along, if that's the way Route 20 is now, that there are very few motels and things like that along the route, I'm going to have to kind of plan it so that I get to major towns, which means the next major town after Toledo is Cleveland, and then from Cleveland to Erie, Pennsylvania, and then to Buffalo, New York. I'd like to make Buffalo, New York by tonight. We'll see. So it's a wonderful adventure.
Buffalo? Did he say Buffalo, New York? Is that where we're going? I guess he'll tell us when he's ready. Now, before he pulled out of the motel parking lot, he thought it would be a good idea to show you how easily the various bags quickly remount, making the possibility of taking your stuff into the motel with you a practical reality.
Folks, I'd like to take just a moment here to show you. I'm so enthused about this bags, or I'd almost call it luggage, and how well it's, like I say, it's really well thought out, and I want to show you how easy this stuff is to put back on. First, I'll start with a tank bag. That's all there is to it. Now, of course, the tank bed is a little bit more difficult than the saddlebags because of the four cam locks at each end. And I'm not sure that the magnetic bags wouldn't be a better idea. I have no experience with them, so I don't know. But they tell me they're easier on and off. Basically what they are is they got flaps that hang down on each side of the tank with big magnets in them that stick the thing to the tank, and a security strap that goes around the steering in the front. Like I say, I don't have any experience with it, so I really can't tell you. But this works extremely well, and that's easy enough. And now the bags. And that's it. I'm ready to go. This is wonderful. You can lift the whole thing off. So again, you don't want to leave the stuff overnight out in front of the motel. One other thing, by the way, I couldn't resist it. It actually works out pretty good, I guess. When I was out at Whitney, that's a long story. I had to make a panic run out there to get the tail bag in the tank bag. But while I was out there, I kind of thought somebody said to me something about, well, Bill, what kind of security system do you have? And they got, obviously, like all these companies, they've got all kinds of elaborate things. They've got a kind that once you arm it, somebody touches the bike or any motion on the bike at all, it sets an alarm off on the bike. You also have a little pager beeper thing that you carry with you, and it sets up to a half a mile. It'll set your beeper off and all that. I didn't want to fool with the electrical system of the bike. This thing is running so well, and it's been so reliable. I don't want to touch it. Plus the fact, I was in a hurry. I was out of time, wanted something quick and simple. Well, guess what? This little baby right here works extremely well, and it's actually kind of clever the way it's designed. First of all, you don't have to tie into the battery system of the bike itself. It's a self-contained battery. It's got 2 wheels on it here. You need to know the code, and when you have it on code, it won't go off. Move the wheels off code, and if somebody moves the bike, it goes off, and it's totally not connected with the rest of the bike except being clamped to the frame tube there. I know it works well, but not because anybody tried to mess with the bike overnight, but I woke everybody up in the motel this morning because I forgot about it.
Bill sure seems to be having a better trip this time than the one 40 years ago. By the way, he says the little alarm sounds like a smoke detector going off. At least that's what the people who came out of their rooms said. Now, while Bill proceeds east on Route 20 in Ohio, let's rejoin Janine as she picks up the story of Bill's first motorcycle trip when he was 21.
When we left Bill and Todd before, they were sitting on a couple of good-sized boulders alongside Route 66, pondering their dilemma. Todd's gas tank had developed a crack in a seam, and he was losing fuel. This was in addition to both bikes having developed cracks in their oil tanks. Adding oil continuously temporarily solved the oil tank problem, but the fuel tank was more ominous. This was a real safety problem, and they had to come up with a solution. After chatting for an hour or so, ignoring the aggravation, Bill was reminded of their situation. He writes, "I smell gas again, Todd." We got up and walked over to the bikes. Damn, while we were talking, all of his gas leaked out on the ground. "Well, at least you don't have to worry about blowing up now," I quipped. His glare shot through me. "At least we don't have to drain the gas now to weld the tank," Todd noted, unconcerned. "Only trouble, Todd, is that we don't have a way to weld it out here. We've got to get it to Springfield. I told you I wasn't going to ride it this way anyway." "Todd, you don't seem to get the picture. We have to get the bike to Springfield to fix it. If you don't ride it, we can't get it there. In a few days without food and water, blowing up on the bike will be the least of your worries." "Guess you're right," he said thoughtfully. "I'd better take the chance and ride it." Sometimes, after making a big deal out of something, he would reverse his position for no apparent reason. "You're making me crazy, Todd." "Well, what now?" he said. "If we can find something to drain some of my gas to transfer into your tank, we'd be in business." We each walked down the road in opposite directions to see if we could find something. After half an hour, we were rewarded with a Dixie cup. And it worked, sort of. Sure, a lot of gas leaked through, but we were able to get enough transferred to get him going. We decided to put in just a cupful at a time, so if something did happen, there would be only a small amount of fuel to burn. This seemed to allay his fears, coupled with his insistence that we proceed to Springfield in first gear, slowly, so if the bike went up like a torch, he could dive off. Limping through Springfield, we found that no welding shop would let me use their torches, nor would any of them weld a gas tank, insurance regulations and like that. Finally, I said, "Let's find a cycle shop with torches. I'm sure we can rent them there." Sure enough, the shop we stopped at said I could use them. No, they wouldn't weld a gas tank, nor could I do it there. But there was a vacant lot behind the shop. I could take the stuff out there in the middle of the field and do it. We removed the oil tanks from both bikes and Todd's gas tank, cleaned them as best we could, and filled them with water. Todd decided he would join the onlookers at the back of the cycle shop, as he wouldn't be needed during the actual welding anyway. Sitting on a milk crate in the middle of the field, I began to question the wisdom of this venture. Looking over toward the cycle shop, the onlookers were watching with the intensity of a crowd watching somebody standing on the ledge of a building, threatening to jump. I'd welded gas tanks many times and knew how extremely dangerous it was, but I felt I had developed techniques that made it reasonably safe. Still, the crowd watching with anticipation did make me double-check everything I was doing. Somewhat anticlimactically, the welding was accomplished uneventfully. The shop wouldn't take any money for it, and we reassembled our mounts. We were beginning to feel like real touring guys now, as we completed our repairs and were talking enthusiastically about our trip and how long we'd been on the road to the guy from the cycle shop, who was out front with us. As we were talking, somebody pulled up on a German BMW. He stopped and chatted with us and the shop owner while we were putting away our tools. "Those things are supposed to be good touring bikes," Todd commented, to no one in particular. "How do you like it?" "Fine," the Beamer writer said. "How's your limey stuff working?" Todd continued the conversation. "Oh, we've had a few problems, but nothing we couldn't fix." "You must be having trouble too, stopping at a cycle shop." "No, I'm just trying to find a cycle shop that has a radio for a motorcycle. It's kind of boring on the road by yourself." "Radio on a motorcycle?" we said in unison. I asked, "Do you think you could hear it?" "Sure, if I could find one that would mount on the handlebars. I should have bought one before I left home this morning." "Where's that?" I inquired. "Cleveland." "Cleveland, Ohio?" I was stunned. "That must be 500 miles. "Something like that. Where are you guys from?" "Chicago." "I'm going to Hannibal, if you want to ride along," he mentioned. "No, we're going to St. Louis, then Kansas City." The shop owner told him he didn't have radios for motorcycles. "Well, you guys, have a nice ride. I'm going to take off. I want to get there before dark." "Yeah, good luck." "Imagine that," the cycle shop owner said. "The guy wants to put a radio on a motorcycle. Guys like that will ruin motorcycling." Todd and I exchanged glances, glad that neither one of us had embarrassed ourselves by mentioning that we had all we could do to get less than 200 miles in 2 days, and this guy had done 500 since morning. We had our machines buttoned up, refueled in fresh oil, ready to go again, and getting ready to depart. It was a shame the welding had to be done. My bike had dozens of coats of hand-rubbed black lacquer, and now the oil tank paint was ruined. Todd had spent many hours restoring his 650 Norton Manxman to original condition, and now the paint on his oil and gas tanks were ruined. "Is there a quarter car wash around here?" Todd asked the cycle shop owner. 3 blocks down and turn left. You can't miss it," the shopkeeper answered as he was disappearing into the shop to answer the phone. "What are you asking about a car wash for?" I asked. "We've got to wash these bikes," Todd replied, somewhat surprised at my question. "No way. You never wash a limey scooter when you're out of walking distance from home," I said authoritatively. "Well, I'm washing mine. How are we going to pick up rods with the bikes looking like this?" "I think the bikes are the least of our worries for impressing the ladies. Have you looked in the mirror yet? We're dirty and greasy from top to bottom, and you're contaminated with gasoline, too." Not that I smelt any better. We'd been on the road for 2 days without a change of clothes or a shower. When we planned this trip, it had to be a super low-buck effort because, as always, racing had taken more of its share of our discretionary dollars. We had sleeping bags to sleep in, a small tent in case it rained, and money for food. Somehow the idea of showers hadn't occurred to us, though we did bring 1 change of clothes in case we got wet. We figured we could tie the wet clothes to the handlebars and dry them while driving. "Bill, I'm going to wash my bike. You're just trying to hurry me," he stated flatly. "No, really, Todd. If you want, we'll just sit and wait for an hour and do nothing to prove I'm not trying to hurry you. I just know the bike won't start after you wash it." This business about me trying to hurry him was an ongoing thing. As I said before, we were opposites in most ways. He was pretty laid back. I always had a certain sense of urgency about me. "I know it will start. I've got some plastic to cover the mag and carbs. There won't be any problems. You'll see." He was adamant. I knew further arguing would be useless.
Washing the bike sounds like a good idea to me. I think I agree with Todd if they looked as bad as it sounds. What, with oil and gas all over them? Before we find out who won the argument about to wash or not to wash, let's catch up with Bill on this trip and see if his luck is holding.
I don't know if the audience can read it or not, but behind me the sign up there says Bellevue Hotel and Suites. This is Bellevue, Ohio, and I mentioned earlier, I think, that this was going to be where I went on the first day, get this far, because I had calculated this to be 300 miles from Chicago. Well, as it turns out, it's a little over 340 miles from Chicago, so my calculations were a little bit off there. But I was going by the MapQuest on the internet, and they take the fastest route, which was probably the interstate, and I'm bypassing the interstate almost entirely, except when I have to go around towns and cities. Anyway, I'm in Bellevue, Ohio now. This is about halfway between Toledo and Cleveland, so Toledo should be the next stop. And by the way, this is a motel, so apparently my concerns were unfounded of stopping short last night, but of course I didn't know that.
Boy, what a difference 40 years makes. Bill hasn't mentioned a single thing about problems. Let's go back to Bill and Todd on Route 66 as they continued their Kansas City quest.
We pick up the story of Bill's first motorcycle road trip taken some 40 years ago after Todd washed his bike at what they used to call a quarter car wash. That's what the do-it-yourself high-pressure spray wash used to cost. Bill writes, "It was evening rush hour now in Springfield, and towing Todd was a super pain in the butt. We didn't have any tow rope, so the best thing we could devise was hooking our trouser belts together. This arrangement wasn't really long enough, plus Todd had no experience trying to start a motorcycle by towing it. He tried kick-starting it after washing for at least 20 minutes, while I sat on the guardrail at the car wash and watched. He kicked and kicked until I thought he would pass out. Then he'd sort of look over toward me, our eyes would meet, and he'd immediately start kicking furiously again. I let it go on until I honestly felt I could see blood at the corners of his mouth, that he was starting to cough up. We'd been pulling it now for about a half hour. It was a slow process because of all of the traffic. I tow him up to about 50, then he'd let go of the belt, kick it in gear, chug, 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 again and again. It started to pop occasionally about 10 minutes ago, and I was sure we were getting closer. I turned around to retrieve him once again and paused as he grabbed the end of the belt. By the way, when it starts, be sure to keep it running at all costs, I warned. What do you think, I'm stupid enough to shut it off after all the work to get it going? He snapped angrily. Well, just in case it occurs to you to put on gloves or some fool thing, I said sarcastically. As if a light bulb went on inside of him. Wait a minute, he hastily spit out and started digging in his pockets for his gloves. Okay, he indicated, having donned his gloves. You make me crazy, and I can only laugh. Now, I'm sure that sounds a little unreasonable. Although I rarely wore gloves, I'm sure it's a good idea. You just had to know Todd to understand my exasperation. After about an hour, we finally got it running. We were about halfway to St. Louis now, about 50 miles from Springfield. Neither one of us had mentioned anything about the bike washing fiasco during the last couple of maintenance stops. I'm sorry about washing the bike, he offered. On about our third stop on this segment, this time the chain needed adjusting. It's okay, man. I felt big about not rubbing it in. There was no reason for it not to start. You saw how careful I was to cover the mag and carbs. He appealed to my reason. I'm telling you, Todd, when you ride a British bike, you pray a dog doesn't come along while it's parked and take a leak on the front wheel, because it probably won't start for a week. I clearly made my point. As we rode on, I speculated about why British bikes were so sensitive to moisture and why lights on an Italian bike never worked, even brand new. Boy, that Japanese Honda my brother bought sure didn't have any problems. Oh, you could buy a BMW if you wanted trouble-free, but they were slow and not very exciting. That little Honda sure wasn't slow. I remember when my younger brother Eric first bought it, a 305 Superhawk, an odd displacement. We never were quite sure back then where it was supposed to fit in. Generally, the lightweight market was the 250s, the middleweights 500s, and the big bikes were 650s, and Harleys and Indians and Vincents. I studied it carefully when he brought it home. Electric starting, overhead cam. But why 305? We had no idea then the Japanese were going to rewrite how motorcycling was done. I remember my first writing impression. For one thing, everything worked. When I first wrote it, I hadn't read the owner's manual and just kind of played it by ear. The electric starter fired it up first time. The engine was incredibly smooth. It neither shook anything loose nor leaked any oil. I concluded after my ride that it was a nice little bike, and my brother had done well in his selection. The choice was a risky one because no one had seen a Honda before. There were no dealers, and they weren't any cheaper to buy than other bikes in that general displacement range. One day, about a week later, while watching television, I noticed the Superhawk owner's manual laying on the coffee table. While leafing through it, I noticed the engine's maximum horsepower was at 9,000 RPM. It didn't register right away. I flipped through a couple more pages while thinking about it. 9,000 RPM? Must be a metric RPM. Wait a minute, there's no metric RPM. Revolutions per minute is revolutions per minute. I'd confined my brief ride to a maximum of 5,000 RPM, which made me a little uncomfortable because that was getting close to the red line on British bikes and was probably past the red line of the Harleys and Indians. Running it at 5,000 RPM seemed reckless. Hey, Eric, let me have the key to your bike. I want to check something out. Okay, don't break it, he cautioned, aware of my penchant for being hard on equipment. I was not prepared for the stunning performance of that little bike, not much bigger than a lightweight. I could tell right away that this was a whole new motorcycling experience. When I nailed the throttle in earnest, the bike accelerated smoothly and briskly until about 7,000 RPM, when all hell broke loose. Where other bikes I'd ever ridden would be completely out of breath and probably self-destructing, the Superhawk acted like I hit an afterburner switch. The front wheel lifted off the pavement. The tach swung to 10,000 RPM so quickly it caught me by surprise. I quickly shifted to third, then fourth, then fifth, letting the tach swing to 10,000 RPM each time. The performance was astonishing. The overhead cam wasn't wasted on this thing, I thought. Various motorcycle companies had used overhead cams for racing purposes for years, but for some reason, I never totally understood. The high-tech stuff never made it to the marketplace. The Japanese sure took advantage of leading-edge technology, and on a street bike at that. The rush this bike provided between 7,000 and 10,000 was addictive. I couldn't stay away from that range once I found it. I spent that evening chasing after friends with Triumphs, BSAs, Harleys, and the like. I delighted in trouncing them with this little Honda at every impromptu stoplight drag race. I remember vividly wishing Honda made a big bike. This thing has everything but size: power, speed, reliability, great lighting, oil tight. Yeah, if they only made a big bike, what a weapon that would be. Well, we were pulling off for a maintenance check again. I should probably mention that these maintenance stops had become more acceptable as we developed the habit of pulling into a tavern parking lot to tend to mechanical needs. And as long as we were there, well, you get the idea. There's something wrong with my bike, Bill, Todd said sheepishly, indicating an unwillingness to mention it. What do you mean? I'm not sure, but you know how often I've had to adjust the chain these past couple of days. There must be something wrong. We discussed the problem for a while. His chain had been tightening up all the time, an opposite symptom of chain wear. Sure enough, we checked the primary chain and it was extremely loose. Yeah, you guessed it. The Norton, as did my A10 BSA, had a separate transmission and engine connected by a primary chain. The transmission mounting bolts had vibrated loose enough to allow the transmission to creep forward toward the engine, loosening the primary chain and tightening the rear final drive chain. We were starting to wonder when the fun part of touring started. If we had the bike in a shop, readjusting the primary chain was relatively easy and could be done in an hour or two. On the road, with minimum tools, it was a filthy hassle. A couple of hours later, we were on our way, this time determined to get to St. Louis without stopping again.
Gee, St. Louis doesn't seem that far to me. It's hard to believe how long they've been traveling. Now, before we see where Bill is now, we would like to share a little of the riding experience Bill is enjoying in 2004. If you'll recall, he said he wanted to take us along with him. So pretend you're on the back of the bike and hold on.
Rolling hills, beautiful green. I think I was going a little too slow for the semis that just went by because I'm only running along here about 50 miles an hour, and I haven't seen a stop or speed limit sign lately, but I'm sure it's more than that. At least everybody else is going a lot faster than I'm going. A nice motocross bike for sale. Boy, I bet this would be nice out here in the country to have a motocross bike. Spend hours out there. Oh, it's 55 miles an hour to speed up. I'm doing 55. All right, that's okay. Not so bad. Not 65, not doing 50. But everybody definitely wants to go faster than I'm going right now, and I'm using my left hand to hold the cables and the camera because I've got to keep the pouch sort of unzipped to make this work. It's hard to explain, you'd have to see it, but I'm just trying to be very careful not to lose anything. But look how pretty this is, folks. This is, you just don't see this sort of thing in the interstates, and again, I'm not wrapping the interstates. I think someday we will look back and see the interstate highway system in America in much the same way they look at the China Great Wall. I think it's an absolutely stunning achievement. It is amazing that you can jump in your car or motorcycle and literally go anywhere in America without seeing traffic lights and stop signs and things like that, and very safe. This section of Route 2 here happens to be divided, but it's not always divided. The divided highways are much safer without the intersections and all that. So for making time and for safety, there's no question the interstates are wonderful.
That does seem like fun, and not a hint of problems. The bike is running perfectly, and he's not dropping his clothes and gear out of the saddlebags. Bill remembers distinctly, on his trip 40 years ago, Todd roaring up next to him yelling, "You're dropping socks." Let's see where he is now and how he's doing.
Well, there it is, folks. Pennsylvania. I'm just about to go into Pennsylvania and leave Ohio. I meant to stop in Cleveland and do a piece there, but unfortunately had something of a screw up in Cleveland. Somehow, I took the interstate highway system to get through Cleveland rapidly rather than kind of work my way through all the little town streets and all that sort of thing. Somehow, I don't think the expressway interchange was very clearly marked, and by the time I realized I was supposed to be in the left lane, I was in the right lane, and that is not the time at 70 miles an hour to be crossing over lanes and all that. And sometimes you just got to eat it. When you make a mistake, then you have to find a way to undo it, and sometimes it takes an hour, like it did in Cleveland, so I had to kind of keep on going. By the way, that's not the first miscue I've had. Yesterday, darn near run out of gas as it was getting starting to get dark, and I'd been on Route 20 for a long time. I don't know if I mentioned before, I'm averaging about 50 miles to the gallon, which is about, I'd say 6 or 7% less than without the windshield and the bags and all that stuff. So not bad. I thought it would be worse than that. So it's a little over 50 miles to the gallon I'm averaging. But in any event, I kind of watched the speedometer. When I get to about 150 miles, I start looking for fuel. And no station, mile after mile goes by, no station, and it's extremely rural. And I finally said to myself, you know what, I'm going to run out of gas out here in the middle of nowhere. And the next farmhouse I came to, I stopped and told them of my dilemma, and could they please tell me where people around there buy gas? And they said, well, there's really nothing on Route 20 in this area, but if you go down to that road and make a right turn about a mile off of it, there's a gas station there. And that's what I did. Good thing I stopped and asked, because if I'd kept going, I for sure would have run out of gas. And that's part of the adventure. By the way, I want to talk about that for just a little bit here. I thought about it when I came through Cleveland and approaching Cleveland, coming through Cleveland, and on the other side of Cleveland, coming part way here to Pennsylvania. I was on the interstate, and it really was not enjoyable at all. Yes, you make good time, no doubt about it. But I was thinking about it. Why isn't it enjoyable? What's the difference? I think I understand it now. And let's see if I can articulate it this way. Used to be a place, I understand it's closed now, but there used to be a place in Maywood, Illinois, called the Comeback Inn. Very rustic place, big log cabins, big, huge place, and they had 5 or 6 real wood fireplaces, and I mean huge ones in there, where they put real logs in, they burn the logs, and people used to sit there for hours, mesmerized by the burning logs and all that. Some time ago, they changed it to gas. I'm not sure if it was because of the town's ordinance or something with the real fireplaces, or if it was just too much of a pain in the neck. I don't know. But it changed everything. And I watched the people. They no longer watched the fire. They'd take a look at it. It was nice to have the heat of the gas fire. But clearly they weren't interested. And here's what I think the difference is. When you watch a real fireplace, a real wood fireplace, the picture is constantly changing. It's all fire, just like when the gas is in there, it's all fire. But with a real wood fireplaces, it's consuming more and more of the wood. The flame might be brighter, or it pops white, or something like that. It is a continually changing scene, and it pleases the eye and pleases the emotions. I think it's the same thing with the interstate. I wonder what's wrong with this. First of all, they're beautiful. There's no question about it. They're beautifully maintained. The signage is excellent. The landscaping around them is all excellent. The problem is, it's all the same. And you end up just kind of laying your ears back and trying to put miles on it instead of enjoying the trip. And there really isn't anything to enjoy because it's the same scenery over and over. Beautiful, yes, but after an hour and a half of continually the same scenery, you just want to put miles on. Conversely, Route 20 that I'm on now, and Route 66 was very much the same way, it's continually changing. Now, I know you're probably thinking, well, Bill, all little towns are pretty much alike. It's really not true. I was thinking about that as I looked around and wanted to try to figure out what was so pleasing to my eye not being on the interstate. And what I concluded was there must have been thousands and thousands of architects over the years and home builders during different periods that built different homes and different styled homes and all that. And somehow that changed, just like a real wood fireplace compared to a gas fireplace, is more compelling. I think that constantly changing scenery, this person does their landscaping this way, that person does their landscape this way, and we're not talking about 5 different ways, we're talking about thousands of different ways as you go down the road. Same thing, things like lettering. Every sign painter does different lettering, and there are literally thousands of sign painters that have created signs, net for people's stores and what have you along the road. And that is, again, I think it gives texture. I think it's pleasing to the eye. So while you're rolling down the road on these non-interstates, like Route 20 or Route 66, the scenery is constantly changing. Yes, there is some similarity between the towns, and yes, you do, for example, in Ohio, you probably go 50, 60 miles of running along at 60 miles an hour, then you have to slow. Matter of fact, when you go through these towns, some of them you have to slow down to 50, some of them 45, some 35, and in some towns even 25, depending on how many people are there and all that. In any event, yesterday I thought it was cute. One of these ones where you slowed down to 25 miles an hour. I actually almost had to come to a complete stop to get the chickens out of the way. There were chickens actually walked out. It was very cool. Sure isn't going to happen on the interstate. Probably not very safe, but it's interesting and makes the entire trip interesting. And this isn't about making time. This is about enjoying the trip.
Bill sure seems to be enjoying himself, and I think he ought to lose the suit more often. Let's ride along with him a little farther.
You know the old thing about corn supposed to be knee-high by the 4th of July. Well, we're right here at the first day of August. To me, the corn is huge and probably getting time to harvest. I see things like that you never see on the interstate. Some people would say, thank God, and I say, oh no, I miss it. I find all of this stuff interesting. Special thank you to Bill Young, sale, so there must be water around here somewhere.
Never been on a motorcycle, but that sure looks like fun. Bill promised he'll take me for a ride this summer, but it won't be today because we're out of time with only enough left to acknowledge the fine work of our award-winning production team, including Chuck Itzenthaler, Sue Cassanda, our webmaster Frank Barbalace, Rena Borwitz, and Tom McGrady. Special thanks to JBTV's Jerry Bryant. Music is created for us by independent artists Roger Pauley and Jerry Herbert. Of course, we have to take a moment to thank the stars of this edition of Motorsports Unlimited. Patty Borwitz, Janine Lauschat, and our host, Bill Wildt. Me, I'm Samantha Bentley, still wondering where Bill is taking us. He mentioned Buffalo, New York. But is that the final destination? I'm sure we'll find out next week. Thanks for watching. See you next week.
This program made possible in part by support from Copy That, located in the County Farm Plaza at County Farm Road and Army Trail Road in Carroll Stream, Illinois.
This program made possible in part by support from Bridgestone Firestone and your local Bridgestone Firestone tire retailers.
This program made possible in part by support from PB Food Products, located on 47th Street at Western Avenue in Chicago, Illinois.
Motorsports Unlimited is produced by Bill Wildt, president of the Motorsport Advancement Crusade.
This program made possible in part by support from J.C. Whitney & Company, located just off I-80 at the Utica exit in LaSalle, Illinois.
This program made possible in part by support from the Chicagoland Toys for Tots Motorcycle Parade, held on Western Avenue in Chicago, the first Sunday in December.
This program made possible in part by support from Jimmy's Red Hots, located on Grand Avenue and Pulaski Road in Chicago.
This program made possible in part by support from ABC Auto Parts, located on Ashland Avenue at 138th Street in Blue Island, Illinois.
Motorsports Unlimited was created to raise public consciousness, understanding, and appreciation of the motorsport community and their activities. You can contact us by email at msutv.com, or you can write to Motorsport, P.O. Box 66242, Chicago, Illinois, 60666. We enjoy hearing from our audience. Please let us know what you think.
Next week on Motorsports Unlimited, we continue with my motorcycle adventure of last summer and my motorcycle adventure of 40 years ago. You already know my high school friend Todd and I were going to Kansas City on Route 66 decades ago. What you don't know is where I went this time, and I'm not going to tell you now. You'll have to join us next week on Motorsports Unlimited as we continue to spin the yarn.
So that's it, another edition of Motorsports Unlimited and the lovely ladies of motorsports. And be with us next week because we'll have something real exciting. Bill Wildt's going to have the lovely ladies, and just about anything can happen right here on Motorsports Unlimited. Every week at this time, we bring you the best in motorsports. So be seeing ya. Bye-bye. And keep on rocking.